Wine is weird. Most beverages either don't go bad over time, like spirits for example, or they have a best before date, like apple juice. Wine, however, has a best before and after date. The periods between those dates are called drinking windows, and they are a big mystery to many of us. Most wine publications show drinking windows next to their scores and tasting notes, and while the scores are oftentimes a controversial topic, tasting windows are just accepted, even though they have significant shortcomings. So let's find out whether drinking windows are useful or useless by tasting some old wines from my collection and seeing whether their drinking windows were actually estimated correctly by the major critics. Let's go. While ratings are explained on the websites of wine publications such as Robert Parker, Jancis Robinson, Vinous and Wine Spectator, it is far more difficult to find out how those publications actually determine the drinking windows of the wines they rate. Even the resourceful Oxford Companion does not have an entry discussing drinking windows, and I had to dig deep into the Wine Spectator help pages in order to find this. Based on the taster's years of experience with this type of wine, the drink window suggests when the wine is likely to be at its best. It typically covers a range of years or will state drink now. Adjust for your preference if you know you like your wines on the younger or older side. Aged wines are an acquired taste. Or if your personal experience with the producer or vineyard in question differs. I actually believe that drinking windows play an important role when it comes to enjoying your wines, maybe an even more important role than the score itself. The best wine in the world will not bring you joy when it's past its drinking window, slowly turning into vinegar. However, they only play a role for a small but important segment of the global wine production. I would say more than 95% of all wines produced should be consumed within the first 2 years after bottling. While wine does not go bad like fish, for example, I've tasted many wines that were great but had lost their spark before I opened them, or wines that could have been really amazing but were consumed way too young. In order to taste great wines when they are at their peak, we need accurate drinking windows. But getting to the bottom of this topic is more complicated than it might seem at first glance. I looked up some random wines on different publications and I found significant differences. For example, for the 2020 Robert Weil Gräfenberg GG, a Riesling that I've tasted many times on this channel, Jancis Robinson recommends drinking it between 20-25 and 35. Vinous says 25 to 50, and Robert Parker actually says 27 to 60. So there's a 25-year gap between the drink by date on Jancis Robinson and the drink by date on robertparker.com. Another wine I saw was the 2019 Ao Yun from Yunnan. I actually said Ningxia in a previous video, that was wrong. And Jancis Robinson states that you should consume it between 23 and 30. Vinous says 24 and 34. And Robert Parker says 23 and 39. So there is a 9-year gap again between the recommendation of Jancis Robinson and Robert Parker. And the question also arises, how can they know for wine that was first produced in 2013? So how can you estimate how long this wine will be able to age, even though you've never really tasted it aged? The problem with drinking windows is that you can't predict the future, so you can't calculate the drinking window based on the content of certain ingredients in the bottle of wine. Instead, critics rely on their prior knowledge when it comes to aging certain grape varieties, wine styles, or wine from a given wine region. The data most critics have to rely on is, however, imperfect, as it is difficult to compare wines that were made in the past under different climatic conditions using different technology in the cellar with the wines that are made today. On top of that, critics oftentimes find themselves in the conundrum that they want to recommend to their readers that they should age their wines more often, something that many people just don't do, even with high quality wines. But they also don't want to be blamed if the wine is spoiled once their readers open the bottle based on their recommendation. So most of the time, in my experience at least, they err on the side of caution. The ageability of a wine depends on several factors like the alcohol level, tannin level, acidity level and sugar level, but it's also influenced by winemaking practices such as barrel aging and fortification. But you can't just add up all the concentrations in order to get to the aging potential or the drinking window. My old friend here, the Hunter Valley Semillon, is actually a wine that has low alcohol levels, doesn't have any tannins to speak of, doesn't have any sugar. It is not aged in barrel, but still it keeps really well and it tastes delicious when other high octane red wines, for example, have already run out of steam. So while determining the aging potential of a wine is difficult enough, there's also the problem that two bottles of the same wine will taste very differently if one bottle is stored in a perfect cellar like this one and the other one is just stored somewhere in the sunlight on a kitchen counter. But now let's put drinking windows to the test by opening a few bottles from my cellar and seeing how their drinking windows compare to what is in the glass. Let's go. All right, let's do this. Let's go. So these are all wines that are either in their drinking window or already out of their drinking window, meaning that they should be too old. And I'm just going to open them up to see whether they are still beautiful or vinegar. So I'm starting off with the 2021 Schloss Johannisberg Riesling Gelblack. And Robert Parker states that its drinking window should have started in 2022 and finish in 2032, which is quite impressive as this is more of an entry-level wine. Yeah, but let's see whether it's already bad. To be honest, I don't really think it has gone bad yet. This is a winery that is able to produce really age-worthy wines. I've tasted some wines on this channel that were quite old, made by this producer. So I'm expecting this to be delicious still, but maybe it's too young. Maybe we should actually start drinking this in 2 years. Did you see that in the background? The light just keeps changing color. I think I'm just going to unplug it. It annoys me. One second. So, well, how about that? Different, but not too bad. The Riesling overall, I think, is just a great variety that ages really, really well. And oftentimes it's just underestimated. I mean, especially Rieslings with some residual sugar can age for decades easily. And even the dry ones can age for a long, long time. So I've tasted this wine when it was just fresh, really young. And let's see how it has developed over time. The color certainly become a little bit more golden as far as I remember. And the flavor profile has also developed. This is actually a little bit more caramelly. There's a little bit of pineapple character, like caramel notes, pineapple and caramel. Quite nice. Just as nice as it sounds. When it comes to the ageability of a wine, I think the texture is also really important. If it feels flat and the acidity has lost its liveliness, then this is probably a wine that you should drink up quickly. This is absolutely perfect right now. It shows a little bit of maturity, but it still has a lot of freshness. And I would completely agree. I think this is great until the early 2030s. Good start, and Robert Parker and I are in perfect agreement. Or rather, Stefan Reinhardt, who's rated this wine for robertparker.com. Next up, we have an interesting one. This is Frederic Mochel's Gewurztraminer 2012. And Gewurztraminer is not a grape variety that has a lot of aging potential, in my experience at least. And this was actually rated in 2013. So the 2012 vintage wasn't rated, but the 2013 vintage was rated. And in that case, Robert Parker gave it a drinking window from 2015 to 2021. So given that this is 1 year older, I'd say they'd probably given it until the end of 2020 or something like that. So let's see whether this is still alive after that much time has gone by. I don't drink a lot of Gewurztraminer just because it's just too loud and too blousy oftentimes, but it can be nice. I mean, it's a really flowery grape variety that gives you lots of ripe fruit flavor, and if it still maintains some freshness, it can be delicious. But yeah, after some time, it often has those old, like, rotting rose petal aromas, and that's not really enjoyable. A golden color, which is not a big surprise. Most Gewurztraminer has quite a lot of color. The berries actually have dark colored skins, so the wine, even younger wines, tend to have this golden hue. So this is tricky because it has kind of lychee flavors, some rose petals, a little bit of dustiness too, but it's actually not bad. There's also a little bit of bruised apple character, bruised pear, like oxidized pear flavor coming through. So this definitely shows some aging, but I'd still drink it. On the palate, it has good grip. I think it was never a great wine, but it's still an interesting wine. But that said, I do like aged wines, maybe more than many people. So maybe my tolerance for that is a little bit higher. In this case, I would actually say you can still drink this. So it's probably still in its drinking window, but it's already at a stage when not everyone will enjoy it, as it has lost quite a lot of its fresh fruit flavor. So next up we have the 2011 Conde Valdemar Rioja Crianza. So this is a bigger brand. I don't know how many bottles they produce, but I'm pretty sure they produce a lot of bottles. And this is a Crianza, so not a wine that was aged a lot before release. Therefore, it probably doesn't have a lot of aging potential. Robert Parker said that this should drink well between 2015 and 2017, which is a pretty narrow drinking window. So let's find out whether they underestimated this little gem. So this is 90% Tempranillo and 10% Mazzuelo, and it was aged for 15 months in American oak barrels. The aging process in barrel will make the wine more age-worthy. It just exposes it to a little bit of oxygen during that time in barrel, which will help it be more resistant to oxidation after being bottled. But how the wine was aged before bottling is just one of the factors that really play a role here. The quality of the juice of the wine, the base wine, is probably the most important factor. So let's see whether this is good. So while white wines turn golden and then brown with aging, red wines also tend to become more brown, but they get lighter in color as they age. And this actually still looks fairly young. I mean, it has a ruby red color. There's a little bit of garnet there as well, but this is 13 years old, so fairly old. So the nose is fruit driven. There's quite a lot of cherry coming through, a little bit of blackberry. There's also chocolate and vanilla notes as well. On the palate, this is quite juicy and rich. The tannins are still present. There's also good acidity. I mean, this is not a great wine, but it's definitely not an old wine. So I would actually disagree with that drinking window. I think this is still pretty much perfect. It doesn't really show a lot of signs of aging. So I think it's definitely still in its drinking window. And I probably would give it another 5 to 8 years. I certainly tasted some Riojas here on this channel that felt older. This is fresh. So next up we have the 2017 Inama Carmenere Pew. This is actually one of the best producers of Soave, but they also make this Carmenere, which is a grape variety, obviously. And Robert Parker judged that this will drink well between 2021 and 2024. So we are at the very end of its drinking window. So let's see whether it still has more to give. I'm not entirely sure when the first vintage of this wine was made, but it hasn't been around for a long time, and it's always difficult to estimate the potential of a wine that hasn't been around for a long time, especially if that wine style doesn't really exist in that region either. There's not a lot of Carmenere coming out of the Veneto region. So yeah, maybe they were just a little bit more careful in this case, as they didn't really know what the potential is. All right, again, dark purple color, almost no signs of aging. I mean, there's a little bit of browning towards the rim, and it smells young too. I mean, there's a little bit of pepperiness, ripe cherries, a little bit of black currant flavor coming through as well. Just a touch of spice, even a little bit of oak flavor, but there isn't like new oak flavor. It's more like sawdust kind of flavor. Not that they would have used sawdust in the production. I think this is aged in used barriques. But yeah, this kind of fine, delicate oak flavor. On the palate, it has like this delicate bitterness, good freshness. This is still young. This is not at the end of its drinking window. I would easily give it another 10 years, I think, until it's really at the end. So 34, I would start finishing this when it gets to 2034, if we ever get there. But yeah, this is still very much alive. So next up, we have this little gem, even though little is definitely the wrong word, because this is a heavy bottle. This is the 2015 Garzon Balasto, which is kind of funny. I don't know whether they're actually referring to the weight of this thing, but it's from Uruguay, and Wine Spectator gave it until 2020, so this should actually be old. So this is a cuvee of Tannat, Cabernet Franc, Petit Verdot and Marcelin. And yeah, it's from Uruguay, which is an exciting wine growing country. There's some beautiful wines coming out of this country, but you don't really see them all that often in the international market. Garzon, however, is fairly well distributed. This must have been released in 16 or 17, and I don't really know why Wine Spectator only gave it until 2020. I mean, in the tasting note, they actually say robust and well framed, featuring muscular flavors of dark plum, baker's chocolate and mocha that are supported by firm tannins. And that doesn't really sound like a wine that can't age. But then again, I think most of those publications really err on the side of caution. So they don't want to kind of tell their readers that they should age this for 20 years before popping the cork and then getting blamed for the fact that they've waited too long. Just by looking at the color, I mean, you can definitely see that this does not look old. This definitely has the attributes that are described. The color is really dark ruby, and there's almost no browning there. Flavor-wise, this is super concentrated, lots of dark berry fruit, a little bit of this chocolate character as well. And to be honest, I actually think this feels like it's too young. So after smelling and tasting this, I would say this is not even in its drinking window, and it's definitely not old. I would say you should keep this for another maybe 4 years until you open the bottle, and then I'm pretty sure you can age this for another 10 to 20 years. So I would actually say this is a 2028 until 2048. So much structure, so much concentration, grip. And the reason why I think this is not ready yet is that I think it's holding something back. So the flavor hasn't developed fully yet. It feels like you're smelling a seed of something that is going to come in the near future. So I completely disagree with the assessment here, and I think this is a pretty amazing wine. So next up, we have the 2013 Domaine de la Tourade Fond des Aïeux from Gigondas, from the south of France. And Robert Parker gave it a drinking window from 2015 to 15. I don't really know what that means. Kind of indicating that you should drink it in 2015 rather than wait a little longer, which is odd because this was probably released in 2015, but let's see, maybe it's already gone. So the wines from the southern Rhone are usually not super structured, and that makes people believe that they might not age very well, but the really good ones, they can age for decades, and they can be absolutely fascinating. So let's hope this still has something to offer. So this actually shows quite a lot more browning here. It's garnet, but this is actually fairly typical for the wines from Gigondas and also Châteauneuf. The most important grape variety here is Grenache, and Grenache doesn't have a lot of color oftentimes. The wines look kind of like this when they are still fairly young. On the nose, I get quite a lot of strawberry and raspberry flavor. There's also some like cherry notes coming through as well. Quite a bit of spice, a little bit of an herbaceous character. On the palate, the wine still shows grip. The tannins are fine grained, and it has a pretty beautiful texture. I would actually say that this is coming to the end of its drinking window. So 2015 isn't correct at all. I would say 2024 or 2025 is probably a better end for the drinking window. This is still delicious. It feels like it lost some of its freshness, some of its fruit, but this is still quite an enjoyable, wild, slightly gamey kind of red wine. I just had another look at the tasting note, and I realized that the drink date is stated as 2015 to 2015, but in the tasting note, Jeb Dunnock, who wrote it, actually says that it has 4 to 5 years of prime drinking. So I'm guessing that means his drinking window was actually until 2018 instead of 2015. Maybe it means 4 to 5 more years, as he has tasted it in 2016. That would mean 2021. I'm confused. Either way, I still think he underrated the potential of this wine. And I also think they should kind of clean up their database if they have more of that kind of confusing information. Yeah, so I think this is probably at the end of its drinking window, 25. I think after 25, all of the bottles that are left of this should have been consumed by then. Last but not least, we have the 2000 Chateau du Tertre from Margaux in Bordeaux. Robert Parker gave it a drinking window from 2004 to 2018, so this should be past its drinking window for 6 years. Let's find out whether that's actually true. I think Bordeaux is one of those wine styles, wine regions that are often underestimated by those publications when it comes to drinking windows. They tend to age so well that oftentimes like a decade is just not enough, or two, even like a wine like this, which is not the best of the best, but a very good producer can produce really age-worthy wines. But maybe I'm wrong. This is actually a wine that was still rated by Bob Parker. He's kind of the GOAT, so I might just not get it. However, he actually said that this is the best Du Tertre since 1979, which is fairly high praise. All right, this color looks... I'm confident that this suggests a wine that isn't past its peak. Whoa! Oh, now I kind of regret opening this bottle because this smells delicious. So this smells like Bordeaux used to smell, like back in the day, 2000, which is not that long ago, but this is kind of the Bordeaux I first tasted when I got into wine. This is this combination of ripe fruit and spice, the slightly green flavors that you can get from Cabernet Sauvignon, the tobacco leaf character coming through as well, a little bit of red and green bell pepper. Quite exciting. On the palate, quite a lot of structure. The tannins are still there, but they are kind of more mellow than they probably were when Bob rated this wine. Good acidity, good balance, good freshness. There's everything. Like everything is there. It's just a little bit maybe harsher than some people might expect from Bordeaux nowadays, but it it's quite delicious. I agree with Parker's rating. He rated this 91 points, and I would maybe give it 92. But it's just such a beautiful wine, and this kind of goes to show what I said initially. Like, sometimes it's nicer to taste really good wine right in its drinking window, maybe even at its peak, rather than taste world-class 100-point wine too early or too late. So I definitely disagree with Robert Parker here on the drinking window. I think this is right now right in its drinking window, and I would give it another 10 years, maybe just give it 11 until 2035, and yeah, what a delicious wine. I had some issues with most of those drinking windows before I did this tasting, and I think it really confirmed all of the problems that I have with drinking windows. I think they are a great indication, and they can be very, very useful. In some cases even more useful than the scores, but they are most of the time very, very conservative. So I would hope that wine critics all around the world were a little bit more bold and gave consumers a more accurate drinking window. So in all of those cases, apart from this one, we can't tell right now, but in all of the other cases, the drinking windows were too short, and the wines still showed pretty well even after being years past their drinking window. So be bold yourself when aging your wines. Just age them a little bit longer in order to really experience the whole life cycle of a wine. Sometimes some of your wines will go bad in the process, but that's not the end of the world. What would be the end of the world is if you wouldn't experience a wine like that right at the peak of its drinking window. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, then please like it down here. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. My question of the day is, what are your thoughts about drinking windows? Let me know down in the comments. I hope I see you guys again very soon. Until then, stay thirsty.